Hi everyone, welcome back to The Learning Gardener. My name is Pip, and if you haven't been here before, welcome to my garden. And if you have been here before, thank you so much for coming back. Today's video is going to be something a little bit different. We are nearing the end of summer here in Australia, and this is my second growing season in this garden. So I thought I would take you through some of the time-saving hacks and some of the tips I have in the garden, how I apply them in this garden, how I came to discover those tips, and I thought I would share with you some of the strategies I use in this garden to get around various issues that I have found in those two seasons. So I hope you find this video helpful and interesting. If you do, definitely let me know below in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Full disclosure, when I filmed this video, because I am editing Pip, I had a raging fever. So I didn't realize that when I had staggered into the tripod and knocked the camera over in the morning that I somehow magically changed some of the settings. So there are some times when the camera focus is not as I would normally like it. So apologies about that, but I blame the fever. So hopefully you still enjoy this video and you find some of the discussions about the strategies I use in this garden helpful, and hopefully you find something that you can apply to your own garden. If you've watched any of the videos on this channel before, you'll know I love my garden archways that run down the middle of the garden. The area where I live on the south coast of New South Wales, the ticks here are ridiculous. Sometimes you'll get covered in ticks just picking clothes off the clothesline, because like right now the wind is blowing and ticks just rain down on you. My friend lives 3 doors down. She's had ticks all over her family just putting the garbage bins out. We get ticks in the dog's eyes all the time. It's a nightmare. So when I moved to this street, knowing that my best friend lives 3 doors down and that they have all sorts of tick problems, I wanted to deal with that straight away. One of the things that we did that was the best thing that I didn't realize at the time was we took out 2 trees when I moved in. One was full of white ants and overhanging the house, so it had to go. And the other one had actually already collapsed and rerouted into the ground, but was precarious and full of white ants, so we took them out. In doing so, it actually opened the garden up a lot more from a sunshine perspective, which wasn't actually the original goal. It was a happy side effect, but that wasn't the goal. The goal was to not have a tree collapse on the house. But what I've subsequently learned about ticks is that they love moist, shady areas. They need to have access to moisture every 30 minutes to prevent them from dying. So if you can open your garden up to the sunshine a little bit more so that you don't have those damp areas around your garden, you can reduce your tick population. What I did to try and reduce my tick population was plant specific plants. This urn needs a little bit of work, but actually is something that I got for free from my parents' house. It was just sitting neglected at their house. I have no idea how they came across it, but it was literally just sitting on its side in their backyard, getting whippersnipped every so often. And my mum said, "Hey, do you want it?" And I was like, yeah, I do. And so I wanted to build the garden beds kind of around this urn, which is how this alley formed. Now, in this alley, I originally planted alternating plants of rosemary, lavender, and bunny's tail. Bunny's tails I just planted because I liked, but rosemary and lavender are supposed to help deter ticks. It's something about the scent and the oils in the plant. Unfortunately, it didn't work out here because we subsequently had periods where we had something like 1.4 meters of rain over 7 or 8 weeks. And this property backs onto a river, and so the soil here really holds moisture, like really holds it, like soup kitchen holds it when we get a lot of rain. And so the lavender and the rosemary didn't like that. So subsequently what I've done is put lavender and rosemary in pots around the garden or in the birdies raised garden beds. Something else I planted in the garden beds, and you will, when it's in flower, see this scattered around a lot of the garden beds because I've been trying to grow it from seed fairly unsuccessfully, but I grab these at the nursery whenever I see them at the garden centre. These are pyrethrum daisies. They're a beautiful, beautiful daisy. I recently did a video on how I use those pyrethrum daisies to create a dry powder to fight aphids, and so far that has been successful. But I've deliberately planted the things like the lavender and the rosemary. Well, the rosemary I tend to plant into the garden a little bit more because they're going to get big, but the pyrethrum and the lavender I tend to plant on things like the corners and the edges of the garden beds. The reason for this is my dogs, if you've watched this channel before, you know they're involved in my gardening activities, and they're a bit mental and they love to chase each other through the garden beds. It's a little bit harder for them to do this in summer because everything's kind of overgrown and the alleyways are not as clear, but given any chance they will do that. So my theory is that if I have these tick deterrent flowers like pyrethrum and lavender and things like that on the edges, then at least the puppies will brush up against the plants, and maybe they will get some of the oils or the scents of the flowers on them, and that will act as a deterrent for the ticks to bite the dogs. We do obviously also use more traditional methods of tick and flea prevention with the dogs. We do not have a choice about doing that in this area. I know that some people in some areas can get away with avoiding using tick repellent pesticide stuff with their dogs, and I wish we could, because obviously it's chemicals in their body, but if we do that we'll be in a world of hurt really quickly here. But so I just want to make sure that we're as protected as we can be, and this also helps me. Thankfully in this garden I haven't been bitten either so far. I think a lot of that comes down to the fact that we cleared things out and it's let a lot more sunlight into the area and it's not as moist. There is an area of this garden that I desperately need to deal with, which I will show you shortly, that is probably going to get me bitten by a tick. But part of the reason why I haven't dealt with it is because in the height of summer I am also concerned about snakes, so I'm waiting for a cooler day to deal with that. But yeah, it's probably not going to be for the best, because there's shade, because there's lots of leaf litter there, because there's high grasses, and because it is a moister, shadier area of the garden. But I'm doing what I can. Recently I planted another pyrethrum daisy just here. I didn't want to have to do this, but here is this mess. This mess is also supposed to help deter ticks. This is a tansy plant. They produce a beautiful yellow flower. They're a beautiful dried flower. They're just absolutely gorgeous, and the bees love them. However, for some reason in the backyard it wants to turn into cousin it and flop over. I already cut this thing back and it's done it again, but it's about to bloom, so I'm going to let that happen and I'm going to take the blooms and dry them. For some reason the plants out the front actually stand upright and are beautiful, but the tansy out the back, disaster zone. So I'm going to try putting them in pots out the back next season to see if that controls their massive growth a little bit more. I think part of the reason why the ones out the front are so much smaller is because the ground out the front of my house is so compacted I can barely dig down a few inches. So I think that means that the tansy just cannot turn into this out the front. But in theory, tansy does help for a tick repellent plant as well. Now please ignore the mess, but this is the realistic version of my garden. There are areas that need to be dealt with, especially at the end of summer where weed pressure is out of control. This is a lemongrass plant. Lemongrass and marigolds are apparently snake deterrents. The first month that I had the keys to this house, thankfully before we moved in and the dogs came here because they are avid lizard hunters, in that first month I had a fight with a black snake, which was wildly poisonous. And I know that next door there is a huge carpet python that hangs out there, and I know that behind this fence is a gap between the fence and the shed of the neighbors where there is just overgrown weeds and like snake town through there. They can't get in there. They've asked me to try and remove a couple of things over the fence, which I haven't had time to do yet because I've been sick, but I will. if I can, but I need to deter snakes because my dogs are too silly and they will chase a snake. And to be honest, I don't want to find out if they're silly enough to chase a snake. I don't want to have another fight with a snake. I don't want snakes. So I planted some lemongrass. Yeah, it's great for cooking and all of that sort of thing, but if the snakes don't like it, great. And that is why it is positioned where it is. It's positioned in the place where I know that there's a carpet python or whatever it is, diamond python, whoever, a big snake that lives on the other side of this fence. I want to put in some more pots of lemongrass over time, but that's one of the reasons why I planted a ton of marigolds last season and a ton of marigolds this season. Something I wanted to do but didn't get a chance because I was in hospital is I have these what kind of block are they? They're some sort of like retaining wall block that I can't think of the name of for the life of me at the moment. And they were here scattered all over the house when I moved in. And I've put them along the fence line to stop my reactive dog from digging underneath the fence. And what I wanted to do was go around and fill each one with some soil and put marigolds in them as like a protective rim barrier around the house. That it's obviously way too late in the season, so something I plan to do in winter, but think about that if you have snake problems. Lemongrass, marigold, if you have tick problems, tansy, lavender, rosemary, pyrethrum daisies, get it all going. This is the very back of the backyard. This is the area I'm pretending doesn't exist until we get cooler weather. As you can see, the recent rain we've had plus the unpleasant heat has created a situation for me to deal with. It doesn't help that my mower has also broken. So, you know, we've got some things we need to deal with over here. We've also got some things that we need to deal with here. Now, obviously everyone knows compost is amazing, and what you need to think about is that your animals add to the microbes in the soil. The dog poops in the lawn I can use to my advantage, and I can determine what happens with them a bit more. Now, if I leave them out, I get flies everywhere. If I incorporate them into the garden beds, I get flies everywhere. If I pick them up and put them in my compost bin, no flies, and we get nutrition added to the compost. The thing with adding fresh poop to the compost is that sometimes dogs eat weird stuff. Sometimes they have parasites. You need to be a little bit picky about how you use dog poop. Now, what I will say is I'm not an expert in dog poop. Someone told me this, I was willing to accept it as fact, and not willing to spend any time researching dog poop. But because dog poop can have parasites, if the dog poop is not already sort of essentially sun-baked and old when you add it into the compost, so like I just added this morning's one, you can get parasites in the soil. And if you then plant vegetables or plants that you are going to eat from, so veggies, fruits, etc., then sometimes that can cause health problems, apparently. Willing to take it as fact. So what I do to circumvent that and to get rid of the flies and to just chuck the fresh poop in the compost is these 3 are for my veggie beds. This back one is for the garden beds. So it's not for the fruit trees, it's not for anything I eat. It is for just the privacy trees, it's for the flower gardens, for the places where it doesn't matter. And to be honest, the dogs are already doing their business in there anyway. So I keep the dog business in the back bin, and that way it doesn't contaminate the garden bed soil. Therefore, I'm reducing the risk of whatever gross stuff is in dog poop coming into my food, but I'm getting the benefits of having dogs and making the soil more nutritious for the privacy plants and for the potted plants. So something to try. You got to deal with the dog poop anyway. If you guys have watched one of the recent videos on this channel, you'll know that we planted this bed up to support the pollinators as we go into the cooler months. Now, the native Australian bees, the teddy bear bee and the blue-banded bee, are the ones that we have seen come into this garden in force this season. They are not a hive bee. They burrow and they live by themselves, and essentially what they need to do is get it on. So if we have lots of flowers in this garden, we can hopefully facilitate that. And then the mummy bees will go into the burrow and fill that with pollen and then lay their larvae in there, and then the larvae will live off the pollen until it's time to emerge in spring. But the native bees will only live for about 4 to 6 weeks, so we need to make sure we've got as much pollen as possible for them. Now the native bees, why this is important, are the buzz pollinators. So they're the ones that give you the tomatoes. They're the ones that land on the plants, vibrate, and then that vibration actually causes the pollination of the tomato plant. Same for your blueberries. Now, what do they like best? Purple plants. They like salvias. They go nuts for my buddleia. They go crazy for purple zinnias. So what I want to try and do next year is put purple flowers all around my wasp. Why are the wasp coming for me this year? The wasp apparently also likes this agastaki. But what I want to do next year is try and plant purple plants and purple flowers all around my tomatoes. I really just don't like wasps, and they are, I know they're helpful in the garden, but there's just too many of them lately. So plant purple flowers, plant them near your tomatoes, plant them near your blueberries, and hopefully you'll get better pollinators, because your buzz pollinators love purple flowers and they obviously enjoy tomatoes too. My next tip is to try things. This is my blackberry hedge. It has produced an abundance of blackberries. Now you'll see here some later bloomers. They're red, they're not ready yet. And what I was generally doing was waiting until all the flowers on that area had been pollinated before bagging them up. The fruit fly got in there anyway. So I don't know if that's because I didn't bag them up early enough and I should have actually sacrificed some blackberries and bagged them up sooner, or if it's because you can't get a perfect seal around the bag and the fruit fly gets in there and stings them anyway. The other side effect of the bag is that when it rains, they do tend to stick to the berries a bit and can cause some molding. So you can try things in the garden. Hopefully they work out. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes it's not worth the effort. The bags do make it painful harvesting the blackberries, I'm not going to lie. And you do get a lot of blackberries that fall down the bottom and then make the bag manky, and then you've got to kind of deal with it. So I don't know that I'm going to bother with this next year on the blackberries. Maybe I'll just roll with the punches and see how the fruit fly go. And then at least we'll have potentially a better idea what to do for the third season of the blackberries. But what these bags are good for is the tomatoes. Now, if you're just the world's luckiest human who lives in an area where you don't get fruit flies stinging your tomatoes, well, I wish I was you. But we do, and so we really need to do something to protect them, particularly at this late stage of the season. Now, this is a pineapple tomato plant that has been misbehaving big time, and you might wonder why I've been so brutal with it. I think there's some sort of plague in this soil, because all of the pineapple tomatoes have grown huge but had funky looking leaves, and one that I pulled out was all rotten up the inside, and the other one got huge, produced no flowers. This has produced 4 tomatoes in total, and there is not a single flower on it. So something weird going on here. So, and I can see that all the fruit has actually started to color up, and so this plant can actually be pulled now. But what the point of the bags is, this one got by a caterpillar, and see, if I had bagged this up earlier, that wouldn't have happened. These bags don't necessarily provide perfect protection from fruit fly, but when I have bagged the tomatoes early, they haven't got bitten by caterpillars and had them burrow into the tomato and ruin the tomato. The other thing that they've protected from is the parrots. Now, the parrots went for the pineapple tomatoes exclusively last year, and I didn't get any. So at least, that was at least the caterpillar one. At least this year I will get one, although I harvested a tomato the other day that was nearly 1 kilo, and I didn't know what type it is. Turns out it's a pineapple tomato, so I've got 1 kilo of pineapple tomato inside. Very excited. Now this plant here is where I got my surprise pineapple tomato from, which is a surprise because I thought I'd planted just Romas here, but I think from memory some of them died back and I just whacked in some seedlings that I had. But you can see these tomatoes are really quite big and it's way too late to be bagging them up. The only reason I would bag them up now is to protect them from the birds, and that would work really nicely. To protect them from the fruit fly, not so much at this point. If they've been stung, they've been stung at this point. But you know, it's to be honest, it's too late to save them from the caterpillars, it's too late to save them from the fruit fly. So it just is what it is at this point. But thankfully, for some reason, perhaps hound related, the birds haven't been making much of an attempt on our tomatoes this year. I don't know if it's just because of the dismal failure of the pineapple tomato crop that the parrots haven't turned up, or maybe it's because that was more autumn last year, that they just came in the garden and annihilated what was left of the tomatoes, and at this point there's potentially still food elsewhere. But yeah, use your bags if you've got bird problems, use them if you've got fruit fly problems, but you need to get them on early and potentially not worth it with blackberries. You're never going to find a system that 100% protects your produce. The bags for the tomatoes might work against the fruit fly if I bag them up before they go ripe, but to be honest, the best defense is to pick them either as they're starting to color up or just before. So if I'm going to be away for a few days and it's looking like the tomatoes are going to be ripening, which, I mean, to be honest, at this point of the season I'm picking kilos of tomatoes every single day, I would just pick them in abundance before I left and leave them inside to ripen. You can harvest green tomatoes and they will eventually ripen inside, and the same with your yellow or your orange tomatoes that haven't quite ripened up yet. It doesn't really affect the taste. I know there are some people that will argue that it does, but you know what does affect the taste? Little grubs inside your tomatoes. So if you pick early, you protect against fruit fly for the most part with tomatoes, but it doesn't stop the caterpillars, and I find the caterpillars are generally more destructive because I tend to try and be on top of my tomato harvest. When it comes to fruit, like my blackberries, protection is key as early as possible because fruit fly will attack non-ripe fruit. They don't seem to be as enthusiastic to attack unripened tomatoes, although I have seen them do it, but it's just not as common. But unripened fruit, they go for it. So protect them early, and the same thing goes with possums and bush rats. You've got to protect them early. So I protect my corn from the very, very, very beginning. I have lost every single harvest of corn prior to this year, and this year what I changed was the structure I kept them in. And I'll show you that structure in just a second, but the other thing I'll say about fruit fly is if you drop fruit or you drop capsicums or you drop whatever in the garden, pick them up. If you leave them there, fruit fly will swarm. You will see a lot of mess in this area because I'm doing some work here, but what you'll also see is my corn frame. So I didn't build this one myself. It is a continuation of one that I did build to protect my blueberries and strawberries. My dad put this one up for me because the corn had sprouted. I had just had surgery and I couldn't do it. So my dad did me a solid and put it up. He made a handy little door, but what this taught me is that when you try something in the garden, if it works, great. Take those lessons. If it doesn't work, look for different solutions. Think about things, research things. And this was just something I thought of after I did the berry protection, and I went, maybe that'll work for my corn as well. So I tried it this year and it did work. But what I've taken from that is that I need to adjust it. I need to make it so there's more space up the top, because the top of the corn got stuck in the bird netting, and it meant that the corn didn't pollinate as well as it could have, because each of the silk strands on each corn ear needs to get pollen on it in order for the kernel to be pollinated and to be nice and fat and juicy. So, I mean, they were pretty great corn. They were certainly the best corn I've ever had, because all of my other corn has been eaten by bush rats, because as you can see, I back onto the bush. So at least I got some corn, and it was good corn, but I'm going to adjust for next year, which leads me to my next tip, which is when you are putting in infrastructure type things, put in good quality stuff. So these are star picket posts, they're metal, they're nice and strong. If I don't like how this works, I can pull it out. This is recycled bird netting that I used on my very first house when I lived in Sydney to protect my plants from cockatoos, because cockatoos are not my favorite, and they come in and chop off your plants right at the base just for fun. Black cockatoos are cool. White cockatoos, not cool. And at my first house in Sydney, I used a lot of these hardwood stakes. I used them because I got them for free, so they were the right price. The trouble with hardwood stakes is they're useless. So, I mean, you might have a great time with hardwood stakes, in which case, go to. I have eternally found that because our grounds are moist, and because we get periods in Australia of heavy rains, they rot. And so then the second whatever you have supported with them gets exposed to wind, they snap. And the other problem is just down here. This little guy is a particular fan of hardwood stakes. So he has been known to pull them out of gardens. He has been known to drag them across the garden and impale people with them, because there's nothing he loves more than a big stick. So hardwood stakes are not the best, but star picket posts, while they're an initial investment, at least you can reuse them endlessly. These have a lifespan that is limited. You want it? Oh, okay. See? Told you. When I'm talking about investing in infrastructure, I'm not necessarily talking about my birdies raised garden beds. They are something that I chose to put in because of our soil, because it can turn into a soup kitchen if it's wet. What I'm talking about are things like this. So yeah, the stakes are great, we talked about them, but I'm also talking about these, in America I think they're called cattle panels. Here in Australia they're galvanized panels. So you can find various sized ones at the hardware store or at some farming stores, and I wish mine actually had a larger diameter square, but these are the ones I could get, so it is what it is. But the only downside of the smaller square is that big tomatoes sometimes get stuck in it. I've lost 4 tomatoes so far this season, and I'm in the middle of a canning project making diced tomatoes inside, and I've just pulled 8 pints out of the canner. I've got about 12 more to go in, and that's just my first harvest of tomatoes. So I think I'm okay if I lose 3, so it's all right. But the nice thing about these is, again, I can move them around, I can set them up, I can do whatever I need to do in summer, in winter, in whatever. I can use them for sweet peas to grow up, to be beautiful and climbing and make my garden amazing and smell great. I can use them for sugar snap peas, I can use them for shelling peas, I can use them for whatever needs to climb, I can use them for. My most favorite use, which is actually something I need to do here, is to actually trellis tomatoes on them. And the nice thing I have discovered, wasp, is that I can then move them around the bed. So last year I took note of where I had the panels versus where I put the tomatoes versus how that went shade and sun wise, because obviously your tomatoes are going to cast some shade in the garden bed. So then I've made some adjustments this year. I'm going to make some adjustments again next year, and because this is movable and it's not going to degrade over time, I'm good to go. The other reason why I say getting your infrastructure right from the get-go is important is because of the Leaning Tower of Tromboncino. So I had an archway here. To be fair, it did say decorative, but that thing rusted out so fast it was unreal. And then before I knew what was going on, Trombocinos were on the floor and the whole thing had collapsed, and it was a mess. So I managed to get some Rio mesh panels and cable tie them together, which is not a good long-term solution. It was a quick fix, and as you can see, it has been blown over in the wind. But next year I'm going to fix this up, and the Trombocinos are going to grow on a much bigger trellis because they are a beast of a plant. But if I had just invested in proper Rio mesh, I would have been out a little bit more money, not a lot, and it wouldn't have collapsed and I wouldn't have had to deal with it. So if I had actually just invested in getting proper Rio mesh panels in the beginning when I first moved in. It would have saved me a lot of work, and I would have had heaps more growing space, and my poor roses wouldn't have had a year. But there are a couple of reasons why that didn't happen. Number one, I couldn't find anywhere to get Rio mesh panels, and I didn't know that that's what I was looking for, because I was looking for cattle panels, because a lot of the homesteading channels and things like that that I watch, they're based in America. So if you are in Australia, you are looking for Rio mesh. It is at a bare minimum a 2-person job to take a 6-meter length of Rio mesh and bend it into an archway. Depends on how wide it is, but bare minimum of 2 people. The other reason why I didn't put these archways in straight away was because when I first moved into this house, it was about 18 months ago, it needed a ton of work inside. And so all my money went to builders and paint and all of that sort of stuff. And you can actually see that journey if you want to check out some of my previous videos on YouTube. That would be awesome. I would appreciate it. But that was why I didn't spend more money on infrastructure. It's something I've gradually worked on. So, you know, you do what you can, when you can, and you do the best you can. That's all you can do. Now, you might be thinking, setting up your infrastructure properly is not a tip or a hack or a time-saving situation. But it is, because if you set it up properly in the beginning, then you don't have to stuff around with it again 6,000 times like I've had to this summer with collapsing archways and wind-blown archways and hardwoods, stakes being stolen by dogs, and, you know, we've done some things this season. So just trust me, okay? Save yourself some time and do it properly the first time. What we're looking at here is a mini Roma truss tomato, and as you can see, it's got some beautiful tomatoes on it. The story with this tomato plant is that it was about 1 foot high when one of the dogs snapped it off at the base by climbing into the garden bed. And because tomatoes have all these hairs along their stem which can create roots, what I did was I stuck it in the soil, kept it moist for a week, and it obviously started to create roots, because you can see how happy this plant is, and it's got lots of tomatoes and flowers on it. So it's a little bit like a plant that you can grow from cuttings. And we've talked before on this channel a couple of times about plants that I often grow from cuttings to save time, namely basil. So basil, if you just cut it off and remove the lower leaves, it doesn't matter where you cut it, and you keep it in water for 2 weeks, it will create roots. Mine is currently not thrilled about the use of air conditioning inside, but it will still create roots. I also do the same thing with coleus and Mona lavender, and I'm sure there are loads of other plants you can do it with. So just know that if you break your tomato plant, you haven't lost all that time. You can just put it in the ground and keep it moist. And that also, if some of your seedlings fail, you could make more tomatoes from cuttings. Not to mention the fact that you now don't have to wait for basil seeds to mature because they take forever. All I do is buy a couple of mature basil plants from the supermarket at the very beginning of the season, start making cuttings, and then by mid-spring, maybe late spring, I have a ton of basil plants ready to support my tomatoes once they're planted out. One of my favorite hacks and time savers you'll actually see just here, it's cardboard. So I hate whippersnipping. It takes forever. To reduce the amount of time I end up whippersnipping, I did lay cardboard in between the beds, as much cardboard as I had anyway, and then put mulch on, and that has reduced the amount I've had to whippersnipper enormously. It also protects my garden beds because they can scratch a little bit, and I don't really want to test that with the whippersnipper, but I noticed when I constructed them, putting the panels together, they did scratch, and I don't want them to rust out. I want them to last as long as possible. So I did use cardboard there, but I've also used cardboard in a load of other places around the garden. So I placed it underneath all of these pots here, because I didn't want to have to move all of these pots in summer every week to whippersnipper in and around here. So there's no grass growing in and around these pots, so all I have to do is whippersnipper around the edge. It'll be easier come winter, but then again, what I'll do over winter is save up all my boxes, and in spring, when I'm planting up some of these pots or moving my pots around, I'll lay another thick layer of cardboard down to reduce the amount of work I have to do. Yeah, it's not the prettiest thing in the world, but to be honest, once the cardboard softens, it's way less obvious. So all you need is really 1 or 2 rainstorms to do that. But around here, because we're right up on the house and up on an old wooden deck, I don't want to put mulch over the top of that to hide the cardboard, because I don't want to encourage white ants into this area. Another place I used cardboard was in the construction of this garden bed this season, and I didn't have enough cardboard to do the entire bed. So around the front part is actually thick layers of newspaper, and what I'll say about that is newspaper is nowhere near as effective in smothering out weeds as the cardboard is. So this area was where there was a tree originally that was full of white ants, and it was dropping branches on the deck and on the house and cracking roof tiles. So when I moved in, the pest report recommended this tree get removed, so I removed it, and then it just kind of sat here like a waste area for ages, because the removalists put a whole heap of stuff here that was outdoor stuff that needed to go into a shed, which I did not have, and it just kind of became a weedy nightmare. And it was such a bad weed situation that I was like, even if I pull this by hand and spray all the vinegar in the world, it's still going to be bad. So I smothered it out, and then I put soil on top as I put plants in. The cardboard will break down underneath, and the plants will eventually put their roots in. I don't actually bother taking the plastic sticky tape off unless it's easy to do, because I find it just works its way to the surface and I pull it out then. But there's a really huge difference in 3 parts of this garden bed, which I'll show you. The front part is where we had newspaper, and so we have weed pressure there because that broke down way faster. This middle section, totally fine because we have cardboard here. The back section, I weeded by hand just as I did for all of this, but I haven't mulched the back section, and I didn't paper or cardboard the back section, and it's a nightmare. Did you guys know that you can use your lawn clippings for so much in the garden? You can use it to fill garden beds up like this one behind me, which is what I did the other day with my last lot of lawn clippings, so that I didn't have to fill the garden bed with quite so much soil. Over time, those lawn clippings are going to break down, and yes, the soil level will drop, but those lawn clippings will turn into a nitrogen-rich soil and part of the organic mix-up of that bed. It's kind of like creating a mini compost bin in that garden bed. The other thing I've used lawn clippings for in the past is as a mulch. I don't do it as much in this garden because you can see we've got a lot of weed pressure here in this garden, and some of that is because it is so unbelievably humid that I haven't wanted to come out and deal with them. The other part is that we've had a lot of on and off rain. We've had a lot of rain forecast, and so I haven't sprayed the weeds with my vinegar solution, which I'll show you next, because it's been supposed to rain, and I find the vinegar solution more effective on a hot day. But once again today we were supposed to have something like 60 mils of rain, and we've had nothing. So I just thought, you know what, I'm just going to mow the lawn and I'm going to spray the weeds, and we'll see how it goes. But because some of those weeds are a succulent style weed, meaning that if I take a cutting or a clipping of it and I drop it somewhere else in the garden, it's going to root in and spread. I really try not to mow anywhere near those weeds because I don't want them in the garden beds, and I don't want to spread them. The whippersnipper does spread them, but you know, you do the best you can with what you can. But if you have a less annoying grass, you can actually take your lawn clippings and spread them like you would any sort of other mulch in your garden beds. Again, as it breaks down, it'll add nitrogen to the soil. Grass clippings actually hold moisture really, really, really well. I'm always careful about adding my lawn clippings either to a compost pile or to the garden beds in any way if it's like really gone to seed. If it's gone to seed, I won't add it, just because I know that my compost doesn't get hot enough because I don't turn it regularly enough. It doesn't break down the seeds, so I don't want grass seeds germinating everywhere. So I'm really careful about when I add grass to compost or garden beds. But as a cost-saving solution for mulch, grass is a great option. Now you can see I've got a week's worth of whippersnippering to do, but all I do with my grass clippings is I empty them into the garden bed, into the compost bin. I move it around so there's a thin layer everywhere, and then I'll water that in so that there's moisture in there to start the breakdown process before I add anything else in or more grass clippings in. It's quite a nice, simple way to fill up your compost bins and get some great compost for next season. I'm at that stage of the growing season where things are going to start winding down soon, and so I'm looking to make sure my compost bins are nice and full and ready so that they start breaking down over winter. I'm not fertilizing as much, but something else you can do with your grass clippings is get a nice big garbage bin with a lid, fill it with some water, get an old pillowcase, pop some of your grass clippings in the pillowcase, tie the end off, and dunk it like a tea bag in the water. And you leave it in there for a little while, and then over time the nutrients in the soil comes out into the water and you can use it like a fertilizer concentrate. I've also done that with banana peels, obviously on a much smaller scale because you're not going to get this many banana peels in your house unless you've got some rabid banana fans at home, and I don't really like bananas, so the only time I have banana peels is when my dad's in town. But again, you soak your bananas in a jar of water for 1 or 2 nights and you've got this beautiful potassium rich fertilizer concentrate that your tomatoes are going to love, that your plants are going to love. So it's a nice way to use these things that your garden's producing anyway, or that your kitchen is producing, for a different purpose, and it's free. Another cost-saving tip I've got for you is to use vinegar and liquid dish soap as your weed killer. There are some recipes online that talk about adding salt to this mixture. My only experience is that no matter how hard I tried, the salt didn't fully dissolve and it ended up clogging up the sprayer and ruining it. And all you really need, sorry for the sound effects, is a decent amount of dish soap in there. The other thing you need is the vinegar. So I use double strength 8% vinegar, and it's just a cheap vinegar, nothing fancy. Now there are a couple of reasons why I use this stuff. One, I don't have to worry if I get it on me. It's not a problem. I could pour vinegar straight on my skin and it's not going to cause problems like if I get traditional weed killers on my skin. Traditional weed killers, like once before, I got a teeny tiny bit on my hand, washed it off immediately, and I had nerve pain in my thumb. So traditional weed killers are crazy poisonous. You need to be really careful when you use them. You need to be really careful how you spray them. And the more I read about things like glyphosate, the more terrified I am of ever using them again. They get into the soil, they get onto the food, they use them to actually kill off wheat at the end of the season so that the grains then are all dried out and ready for harvesting, to reduce the risk of them molding if it rains at the end of season. And you can't cook off or wash off or get rid of the glyphosate off the wheat grain, and it's in so much stuff. And I read something that said that once you get glyphosate in your system, it takes 3 generations to get it out of your family's system, which is just crazy. And even then, you're probably still in trouble if they're still spraying it all over our food. So vinegar, as far as I'm concerned, is the only way forward. It's cheap as well. Glyphosate's hella expensive. As I said, normally it does feel like it's 1,000 degrees, but it's really 1,000,000% humidity. So normally I would choose to do this on a sunny day so that it bakes on. And what the dish soap does is kind of make the vinegar more tacky and sticky and sticks it onto the thing that you're spraying it on. Otherwise, if you don't put the dish soap in, the vinegar just washes off and it doesn't do anything. And I wouldn't do it when we've got rain forecast this afternoon, but I want to show this to you guys, and so far all our rain forecasts have been stupid and wrong. So if it doesn't rain, I will show you the result of this tomorrow. If it does rain, you'll have to come back and check my YouTube shorts, and I'll have to show you how this stuff works another time. But all you do then is just spray it on, no problem. Now, weeds that I find don't respond all that effectively to the vinegar mix, wandering Tradescantia. That stuff is annoying. It will not die. Probably takes about 3 applications to kill it. Boiling water does the trick, but when my entire garden is full of the wandering Tradescantia, boiling water is a bit problematic. So I just do what I can, pull what I can by hand, and hit the rest with vinegar when I'm getting everything else. But if you have a raspberry problem, they do not like this vinegar mix. It kills them really, really effectively. So that was what was in this bed. It penetrated the weed mat underneath and started becoming a problem around here. And I just sprayed it with the vinegar and that killed it off. This bed has subsequently become a pollinator bed for the end of the season. I don't know how well that's actually going to go because the puppies, I can see they've been in here. There's these huge deep footprints and they've stepped on top of all the seedlings. And again, this is why I say survival of the fittest. Plant more than you need, because in this garden seedlings get trampled by dogs. Once you've planted them, they get flipped over in the search for a lizard when they're sitting in their seedling trays. Always plant more than you need, always, especially if you have dogs. I don't think I mentioned the ratio of vinegar to soap that I use. So I probably use about 4 or 5 tablespoons of soap to 2 litres of vinegar. So it's a little bit more than what is recommended in the online recipes, but I just find it sticks better and it's more forgiving if you don't get complete coverage on your spray. So hopefully, if it doesn't rain, we'll come back and see what's died off of this wandering Tradescantia, grass, clover mix, and whatever that other weed is called over there. If it does rain, at least this humidity was for some purpose. You can see my weed killer has already started to work after 2 hours. You can see the difference between the clover where I have and have not sprayed. And even another hour later, we could see even more difference. I'm not going to be able to show you tomorrow's change because the heavens opened big time 4 hours later. I mentioned my survival of the fittest attitude towards seeds and planting more than I need. And the way that I plant my seeds is I use these large planter trays and I fill them with water. That water is then wicked up into the soil, and that helps keep the seedlings well hydrated so that their roots don't burn. It encourages nice deep root development rather than superficial root development, and it stops me from washing away smaller seeds like poppy seeds and foxglove seeds by overhead watering. And you can see in this image that some of the trays are wicking up the water as I'm sowing the seeds faster than others, but that's fine. Over a few hours they will all sort themselves out and be moist. Essentially, creating a wicking bed also gives you some time so that you're not always having to nurse your seedlings. I do the same thing when I do my DIY seed raising, which I do when I run out of space or if I have an excess of egg cartons, although to be honest, most of the time my egg cartons will end up in the compost bin. But you can use them for raising your seeds. You use them exactly the same way you would use seed punnets, but the only thing is you need to think that the cardboard will get soggy over time, so you need to have something sturdy underneath it so that you can lift and move the seedlings as needed. You can also use excess toilet rolls for this sort of task if you're going to make your own seedling trays. My dog usually steals all my toilet rolls, so I very rarely have spare toilet rolls, but I do occasionally get some, and you can see they're great for labeling. And the nice thing is that you can just plant them directly into the soil and the cardboard will break down over time. But if I manage to get spare toilet rolls, usually I stuff them with lint from the clothes dryer and I use them as fire starters in winter. But this is a great option if you're looking for a cheap DIY method. Apparently eggshells work too, I just haven't tried them. Something I do a lot of though is using my store-bought sweet potatoes that I have neglected and that have started to sprout. I use them to create my own sweet potato slips. So once they've started to grow, all you need to do is plonk them in a container with some soil, make sure the soil doesn't dry out, and over time the slips will grow and they'll also develop a root system. Then you just cut off each slip, plant them in your garden or in your potato grow bags, and bada bing, bada boom, sweet potatoes. The thing with survival of the fittest gardening with seedlings is they're not always going to end up like these beautiful zinnias, although some of them have some leaf miner damage and some of the other ones actually have leaf cutter bee damage. They are actually looking really, really good. But in the middle, these straw flowers and the globe amaranth did not germinate at all. So at least because I planted excess zinnias, at least I'm going to have tons of flowers, even if I'm not going to have any purple straw flowers or globe amaranth. This area shows you the other reason why I plant more than I need, and it's because sometimes things fail to really get going. These are long ago sowed tomato plants, and this is about as big as tomato plants will ever get for me. Same for these celery plants. These were planted more recently, but last year this was as big as my celery seedlings ever got. And so what I think with seedlings is you really have to go survival of the fittest, because if you don't put them in the ground, they end up getting sadder and sadder in their seedling trays like these snapdragons. Whereas the celeries that were this big or smaller, and the same with the broccolis that I ended up just putting in the ground out of frustration, they turned into beautiful plants. So there's an element of just give it a go and see what works out. Plant more than what you need so you will at least have something to put in the ground. Also, that way when for once your broccoli plants do work out and don't get immediately demolished by cabbage moth, then you'll have a ton of broccoli plants and you will have saved yourself time by not having to sow another batch. That being said, I did sow another batch because I don't trust the cabbage moth. I have got a bowl of beet seeds here. So these are ones that I saved from some beets of mine that went to seed, and I'm just going to scatter them through this bed and then scratch them in. So of course things like beetroots and carrots, so root crops, parsnips, will all do better with direct sowing because they don't like it when their roots have been disturbed. But I have generally found that plants on the whole will do better if they're direct sowed. So I have direct sowed a lot more this year than in previous years, but I choose my timing for when I'm going to do that. The reason I'm doing it now is that even though it might seem a bit silly to do it on a piping hot day, is that we're expecting a couple of days worth of rain now. So I then don't have to work as hard to keep these seeds moist to germinate. Now, that is especially true for carrots. So I now won't plant carrot seeds unless I have a favorable 10-day forecast, because the earlier this season I tried to plant a stack of carrots and I did my darndest to keep those seeds moist, because carrot seeds have to stay moist until they germinate, and I was out here hosing them 4 times a day and we had such significant wind that I could not keep them moist and they didn't germinate. So it was a whole lot of effort for not much. So now I'm checking for wind and rain before I direct sow my seeds, and I try and sow as much as I can directly, because number one, it saves me the trouble of having to set up my seedling trays, put the seedling mix in and then wait for them to germinate, nurse them through that, and then pop them out. All I have to do here is just keep the soil moist and hose them and hope for the best, survival of the fittest. But it also seems to make for a healthier plant, and I have found that like all my seedlings that have failed to get going, all my tomato seedlings that were small, all of my celery, broccoli, all my brassicas that just don't do well in seedling trays, if I put them out when they're small, they take off like a rocket. So next year I'm going to experiment a little bit with direct sowing some brassicas as well. There are some things in this area that I can't direct sow, and brassicas, the reason I haven't done it thus far is because the bandicoots do nick the seeds from the deck a little bit, so I don't want to lose them all in here. So I'll try it in spring season once I've definitely got a crop of broccoli and cabbage. going from autumn, but the bandicoots will steal the sweet peas, they'll steal the sunflower seeds, all of those sort of bigger seeds. I don't seem that interested in beets or radishes or things like that, but so there are a couple of seeds that I'm willing to nurse just so that I get the plant. But generally speaking, put them in, check the forecast, let nature do the rest. This strawberry bed is a great example of why I have tried to put in as many plants as I humanly can into each garden bed this year. So like I said, in some of the beds where I didn't have as much planted, the ground had dried out, it was more crusty, it was a bit more hydrophobic almost, whereas this bed, doing great. Okay, sure, strawberries will throw out runners like it's nobody's business, and even though I've cut them off 600 times, I need to do it again. But when plants kind of are planted this densely, and I only planted like 12 little strawberry plants, I can't even speak anymore, little strawberry plants in here at the start of the season. They were tiny. This bed was basically mulch at that point, and no strawberry plant. Ugh. So hard, but you can see how much they've thickened up, and the effect of this is that the sun doesn't get to bake the ground, it doesn't cook out some of the nutrition. There are very few circumstances where I actually want the sun to bake the ground a little bit, and one of those occasions has been this season when some potatoes had a questionable fungal disease, and so I just let the soil bake for 5 days, and so far so good on that soil. But you can see that if you can plant thicker, you don't have to mulch as much, which is cost saving, time saving, and the canopy that this creates is water saving, meaning you don't have to water as much. And you can see how healthy these are. I almost never water these because it's a pain in the bum to get in here to do it. So the more the merrier. My last tip for you is something that I've been working on today because it allowed me a break from the heat outside, because I could come in and be in the aircon, and we've just gathered more tomatoes and now we've got to deal with them, right? My tip is to learn to preserve food. This is not a time-saving hack. Well, at least not on the day that you're doing the preserving. It will be a time-saving hack down the track, or in winter or in spring when you need some fresh tomatoes and you don't have any. So what I am canning here for the first time is diced tomatoes. These 8 have just come out of the water bath canner. These 8 are about to go in, and you can see I've still got to process all of these. This is just from the initial harvest of tomatoes, but you could learn dehydrating, you could have a freeze dryer, very expensive outlay. You could just cook up a whole bunch of things and have your freezer stocked with ready to go meals, or meal prepped so you have all your tomatoes in the freezer so that when you come to make some winter soups or some whatever, they're ready to go and they're for you to use. So you need to think about food preservation, how you're going to preserve the literal fruits of your labor, and maximize your harvest. So learning to can is not that difficult at all. It does require some setup costs in terms of getting the canners and making sure you have important things like these to lift the jars in and out of the water without burning yourself. But it's not that hard if you follow the instructions. You're not going to give yourself botulism, so you don't need to worry about poisoning your family as long as you follow the instructions. So that's the most important thing, I think, altogether, is that you learn how to use your harvest, and that obviously you grow things that you're going to eat, which I feel like everyone says, but it's true. So I learnt last year that I made a bunch of salsas and I didn't eat a lot of them. I liked them, I just don't eat a lot of salsa. So this year I'm focusing more on canning the basics. So diced tomatoes is what I'm focusing on now. I haven't decided what I'll do with the rest of the other tomatoes, but you just want to make sure you're maximizing the harvest, and the health benefits of doing this are going to be huge, because I'm eating food that hasn't been sprayed with anything, that's had minimal chemical exposure. I would say that they've been organically grown, except they haven't been, because I know the neighborhood uses Roundup. I don't, but I know it's in the neighborhood, so I can't avoid it 100%. I also used fertilizers this year, as I build up my compost and as those garden beds get filled with more and more of that compost over the years, I will wean off using fertilizers. But for the time being, I'm establishing a garden. It's only in its second summer, so it is what it is, but this is still way better quality food that I'm going to get at the supermarket. I know exactly what's in it. I know how long it's been processed for, and it's going to give me, hopefully, a much happier, healthier life. And that's really what it comes down to. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this video, and I hope you've found some handy tricks or hacks or time saving, or if nothing else, that you found it interesting. I really appreciate you guys watching, and I really would appreciate if you haven't already subscribed that you consider doing so. It really helps the channel grow. The more the channel grows, the more I can focus on bringing you guys videos that you hopefully want to see, because I will be able to slowly generate an income from these YouTube videos, which I am now able to do, which is very exciting. And the more I can do that, then the more time I can spend in the garden. So I really appreciate you guys liking, subscribing, commenting, doing all the things, but most importantly, I really appreciate that you're here. Thanks for watching.